Welcome to Product Mastery Now. We have a special episode. This is the 1st of January, for first part of January in 2026. And my podcast producer's with me because she had a good idea. So I'll let her introduce herself and share the idea for this episode.
Hi, my name's Caitlin, and I'm Chad's daughter, and I've been producing the podcast show notes and episodes for the last several years. And the idea was that Chad could react to some of the episodes from the previous year and also from the last 10 years of the podcast.
And it has been going on a bit now, hasn't it? So Caitlin's been doing a great job. She's home for the holidays with us, and I thought we'd get together to do this. So what we're going to do, as we talked about options, we're going to select a total of 5 episodes each that either, in my case, I thought were particularly relevant for product management, product innovation. And I think, Caitlin, you probably chose ones because of the quote. Is that right?
Yeah, I picked some that had interesting quotes that I wanted to hear your take on.
So I'll briefly talk through the episodes we came up with and then give you a reaction to the quote. And I haven't looked at the quotes. I obviously heard them when they were shared by the guests. But if you're new to this, at the end of each episode, I always ask the guest for a innovation quote. They share one and what that kind of means to them. And I usually have a take two, which I don't share on air at the time. And so we'll be doing that a bit. My struggle with this was limiting it to 5. The podcast is now starting on its 12th year. So what we did, we each picked 4 episodes from 2025 last year and 1 episode from the previous 10 years to talk briefly about as well. And it's interesting to me that this has been going on so long because I mentioned once to my son that this is the longest running podcast that has been out for product managers. And we haven't missed a week, right? It's been released something every week. And he's like, really? And so he went and asked ChatGPT. And he goes, hey, ChatGPT agrees with you. And I went, oh, that's interesting. So I had to ask Gemini and Grok and Claude, and they all agreed, which was a good thing. So your mileage might differ, but if you ask it, this is the longest running podcast. And the challenge in selecting just 4 from last year, was we had a lot of really good conversations. So I hope you might go back to some of these you hear highlights of, or certainly listen in the future as well. Caitlin, anything else you want to share before we get started?
Yeah, I think I was 11 when you first started doing interviews, and that was when we were traveling in an RV for a year, and I got to go along to a couple of the in-person interviews, and then I started working on publishing LinkedIn articles, and now finally producing the show notes. So it's been really great to be part of, and I've learned a lot about product management and innovation on the way too.
Yep. And now you're a graduate student in a PhD program studying physics.
That's right.
So how the time goes by. Yeah, the backstory there is we went on this massive road trip for 1 year as a family. And along the way, I was interviewing people in the innovation space that were creating interesting products and really missed those discussions when we got back. So the podcast started in the first week of January 2015 as a way to continue having those interesting conversations. So that was a lot of fun. Okay, I don't know which episodes you picked. I'm sharing my screen so I can pull up the show notes, and I have some I've already gone to. But why don't you share your first one? I'll find it. We'll talk about it.
Okay, so the first one I picked is 568, How Product Operations Drives Efficiency and Growth with Robert Marten.
Okay, 568, Robert, as I recall, is with Pendo and talked about product operations. And this was a good discussion. We actually had this discussion live at a conference, the PDMA's innovation conference they have each year. Also my favorite conference, if anyone wants to check it out, pdma.org. Really great professional organization for us. But Robert was talking about was we went through in project management, the project management office error, and there's still PMOs that are created, but basically applying the same sort of idea towards product management, and organizations have created a product operations group. And he is the senior manager of product operations at Pendo, which makes software that makes it easy for any of us developing software products to kind of instrument your software to collect data along the way. So good discussion about the value of having a product operations capability to really provide the care and feeding for your product managers and help them all improve in the work they do and be consistent in the work they do and how they present that information, especially to senior leadership. So I'm going to scroll down to the quote as well. And he provided two. I don't know which one you want to talk about. So read one or both that you're interested in.
Okay, I'll read both of them. Learning is not compulsory, neither is survival, and every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets. And these are both from Edwards Deming. But the second one kind of caught my attention when I was writing these show notes. So, how does that apply to product management?
Yeah, so Ed Deming is our total quality management guru that really built on the shoulders of some other statisticians, but gave us the quality movement. Every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets, which is a statement, in my perspective, as all these will be, towards if we're getting the results from a system and they're not the results we want, it's the system isn't broken. The system is delivering what it's been designed to deliver. And so if we have a process or a system that isn't working right, we need to analyze what is different from what we expected and go change that system. So if you're not getting what you want from your product management group or some other aspect of your organization, we have to look at what are the processes in place and try to fix that. And I guess, I don't know if Ed Deming would go to, I don't know what he said about people, but sometimes people get blamed when people are just following the process, and the process is the thing that needs to get fixed.
Yeah, I think this quote caught my eye because it could apply to things outside of product management too. Like for me as a student, thinking about how I'm studying or approaching research, this is good to keep in mind that if the system is not getting the results I want, probably means that the system needs to be redesigned.
Excellent. I'll share the next one. We'll go back and forth on this. I have teed up some in my browser window that I'm sharing here, so I'll just go over that tab. And this was a recent one, and I tried not to say which ones are my real favorites, but this is one of my favorites that we've done. Episode 569, Product Innovation Insights from Non-Buyer Stakeholders with Jenn Tuetken. And Jenn is the Director of Innovation, VP of Innovation at Pella Windows. And I met her at a conference, and she talked about how this window company, Pella is pretty well known, at least in the US, how they re-looked at what was necessary kind of in the industry. And a big warranty issue for all window manufacturers really stems from the installation process. So when they get calls about problems with their windows, more times than not it's related to installation. And the industry has always treated this just as a training issue, right? We need to train installers better. Installers don't buy the product, right? They're just installing it. A builder buys the product, or homeowners buy the product, or an architect. And so it was really interesting to me about how they reframed kind of the problem, right? It's like, well, if we want to improve our windows, let's make it easier for installers to install them right the first time, and also to cut down on the installation time. And that was something that stood out to me too, is looking at cutting down installation time by 72% and going from a two-person team to a one-person task to install these windows. And the big innovation there on the installation was windows are typically installed on new construction from the outside of the building. So you have to be able to get access to the outside, obviously, and do the work. And these windows are designed to be installed from the inside, where you're out of the weather and not having to deal with scaffolding usually, because there's already a floor there to be able to do the installation. And just really fascinating to me. And what I thought was particularly interesting, and frankly, I don't remember if we talked about it in the episode or if it was after our discussion, because I usually have some follow-up with guests as we talk more, and I don't see it in here. But looking at the show notes obviously provides the highlights, and Caitlin also writes these application questions for us, because there are, as I have learned, product management groups that listen to this podcast and we'll have like a lunch meeting, lunch and learn type meeting to get together and talk about some aspect of it. And so we have been doing the application questions since like 2020, I think.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, we did an online summit that year and added those in. So they're helpful for if you want to have this discussions with others at your work about these things. But what I was really impressed by the story was that this is a industry who has not looked at this problem through this lens, right? Let's do something to make our product better for installers who aren't the customer, that they don't buy it. And I was really curious, how did you get your organization on board to support that? That's a hard thing to say, we're going to actually change how we approach this. That's different from the rest of the industry. And she was able to influence the senior leadership team to take action on this. And they started by sending two people, a team of two, out for, and I don't know if you remember, Caitlin, if it was 3 months, I think.
Yeah, it was for 3 months. They sent an engineer and a designer to observe the installers and talk to them.
Yeah, here it is, the ethnographic research, which is pretty good, deep research, right? If you're going to go out with installers for 3 months to learn what they do, and having those two different perspectives was golden, right? The designer and the engineer, and because they see things differently. So I won't spend this much time talking about all of them. We'll never get through. But on to the quote. Go ahead and read the quote that she shared, Caitlin.
I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I know how I'm going to get there. This quote is from Boyd Vardy, a lion tracker.
I think that lion tracker perspective is interesting. I've heard versions of a quote like this before. Knowing that a lion tracker said this is particularly interesting, right? There's some other versions about, I don't know where I'm going, but if I can take the next step, I'll be able to see more once I get there, right? And kind of see what the path looks like. And as long as I'm moving forward, I'll be able to see a little bit better from there. And I do like that idea that in innovation, we often don't know what that end state is like. Maybe we call it product market fit, and we don't know what is that customer's problem early on. We might think we have an understanding of the problem, but until we do some customer research, we don't really know the root causes or what they're trying to accomplish. We don't have true empathy for the customer. We need that. And then we need a solution that is validated with the customer that actually really does solve the problem or help them accomplish what they want. So innovation is this process, this journey of moving forward a little bit, learning what we learned to get there, and looking around and figuring out what we have to do next. So, and the lion tracker adds an interesting twist to this, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating that this was shared by a lion tracker. And I'm not sure exactly how a lion tracker uses this idea, but this was also one of my favorite episodes. And I enjoyed hearing about how they were able to innovate in this really old window industry that hadn't had a lot of innovation for a while. And they did that by not starting out with some solution, but starting out with trying to better understand the customer problem. And that got Pella to having this great market changing innovation.
Excellent. Okay, on to the next episode. Which one is that?
Next episode is 558, How Sketch Comedy Makes You a Better Product Manager and Developer with John Krewson. And I enjoyed listening to this episode. It seemed like you had a pretty fun discussion. John Krewson had experience in sketch comedy and with Saturday Night Live, which I would never have thought about a connection between sketch comedy and product management. So it was really fascinating to hear that connection.
I do like this notion of improvisation, that having some skill in improv is helpful in innovation, because in innovation, we often don't know what like the last quote, right? We don't know what the next step is per se. We have a process and we're certainly following that, but there's all kinds of times that come up that we need to improvise along the way. And I think having some skill in that, like him as a sketch writer and improvising, helps us be a little more adaptable to different situations. And we've had a few guests over the last 11 years address aspects of this. There's Matt Phillips, who has the innovation group in Chicago that helps all kinds of large companies and some startups as well in there. And he did an improv training with a group, which I should remember the name. They're really pretty famous in Chicago. But I think this does help innovators. And I went to a improv class just for a morning, just to kind of see what that was like, and that was fun. So it gives us maybe a different perspective on facing challenges and working through them, knowing those ideas. Let's look at the quote.
Okay, so there are two quotes again. The first is, "We don't go on because it's ready, we go on because it's 11:30." Lorne Michaels.
So that one is about Saturday Night Live. Lorne Michaels, the producer. And so apparently, he talked about this during the podcast. They spend the week getting ready for that live Saturday night performance. And it's kind of like launching a product, right? We have a lot of work to get a product to the point of launching, but there's usually a lot of constraints around that. It's like at 11:30, Saturday Night Live starts, right? Whether we really feel ready or not, that's when things start. And so there's something sort of having deadlines too. I'm a big fan of deadlines to keep things moving forward. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it reminds me of the other quote that the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Mm,
And sometimes it's better to get out your work that you have done, maybe your best work, but probably it's not going to be perfect.
right. That's good. Okay, let's do another one.
Okay, the next one that I pulled up is 549, Mastering Product Innovation Based on 60 Years of Design Insights with Scot and Walter Herbst. And they were
Very
a
nice.
father and son duo talking about their many years of design and product experience.
I had that one on my list too, so it's already teed up. So it doesn't count against me. Still get to pick mine. What I liked about this was just the great experience that these two have, particularly the father of this, Dr. Walter Herbst. He's now a professor at Northwestern University who created a product management program for them and a graduate, they have some classes at the undergrad level, then they have a mastery, a graduate level program that you earn a master's in as well. And then he just has been a product designer for so very long. His claim to fame was the Smithsonian Space and Air exhibit, which I'm sure many of you listening have gone to, always gets high credit for being really good, and we've been there as well. And so that was one of his very early design projects, was designing that exhibit. And today, their group, Herbst Product, they build products basically for companies that come to them with ideas. And he shared a few, him and his son Scott, and Scott has been working with him in this Herbst product design firm for quite a while now and is really leading up the work that takes place out of the main office in California. And Dr. Walter Herbst is certainly involved as well. But one thing that stood out, which I don't know if we have captured as an example in the show notes here, but I remember this as a kid being on infomercials, TV ads a lot, was the pocket fisherman. And it was the tiny little thing that would fold up, a little pocket fisher thing. And it was basically a fishing reel and a little tackle box all built together that you took out, and you could have it in a very small part. You just leave one in the car and go fishing whenever you wanted. And this thing at Father's Day time was always in the TV advertisements, and that was one of their products. And now they certainly have done other things more recently, medical devices a lot as well, and just really fascinating stories. And one thing that really impresses me about their work is they apparently have told customers since the beginning of their design group that if they really don't come up with a market-winning product, something that really does capture the audience and meets the objectives that are set out for it, their work will be free to the customer. Like, how do you do that? They do put things in their favor, right? They're certainly very good at what they do. They start with a lot of ideas, and I like this notion of you don't just pursue one solution for the problem. You deeply understand the problem, and they talk through their process here, that discovery phase that is in most kind of product processes, understanding what the root cause is, what the actual problem is, coming up with the definition of that problem, exploring the concept and the development of that concept, and that's the possible solutions, considering a lot of alternatives. And I don't know if it's in their book or in the episode that was talked about that they like to at least have a dozen that they move forward with, a dozen different solution approaches they move forward with. And then the refinement is narrowing that down and figuring out what really does validate with the customer to solve the problem for them, and that final design. And in that process, they're bringing 4 versions of a minimum viable product to validation testing with customers, and then synthesizing the results of that into something. So, that certainly is in your favor if you're bringing 4 different solutions and testing those to see what you should move forward with. And that book that really describes their process in more detail is the Mastering Product Innovation. And he talked about that a little bit as well. So far we have a lot of double quotes. This does not normally happen. Usually we just have one quote, but since we had 2 guests, they both chose a quote for us. Caitlin, which one do you want us to talk about?
I'll read the first one. I think it sums up what you were just mentioning about their approach to understanding customer problems and solving them. So the quote is, "There's no prize for solving correctly what proves to be the wrong problem. Emeritus
Yeah.
Dean Julio Otino.
It's a good quote. Similar thoughts certainly come out of the lean movement, lean startup movement, which is so many companies work on building a product and then their validation is to launch it. They build a product that they think is solving a customer's problem and they launch it to the market to find out if they got it right or not, which is really painful, right? They're actually addressing the wrong problem. We should have a clear product process like the one they described here, where we're doing definition work and we're looking at alternative solutions. We're validating those with customers to know that we're building something that actually the customer cares about and they're willing to pay good money for. And if we just solve the wrong thing, no one wants to buy a product that they isn't actually solving the problem for them. So we got to make sure we're addressing the right problems. And often the first thing that surfaces as the problem isn't the problem that needs to be solved. That's why we need to do customer research.
Yeah, I think the idea of deeply understanding customer problems will be a common theme in several of these quotes and episodes.
Okay. I suppose I should pick one now. I had one teed up here, and was a special episode because it was about my favorite product innovation conference, which I already mentioned, the PDMA conference. Ignite Innovation is what it's called, but all the information is at pdma.org. And that is the professional organization that really got me into product management work and understanding product innovation better. And they've been researching the field now for over 50 years. It's a nonprofit organization, mostly volunteer ran. And as I have learned more about this space, I've been contributing, serving them by adding some knowledge along the way as well. But I had this great episode in 2025 with the conference organizers that were planning what goes on, Spike Ross-Corbett and Bill Reid. And this is a bit of a cheat because in this episode, we got to talk about our past favorite speakers at PDMA conferences. And we each chose 3. And so I get to highlight a few real quickly. Jeff Thatcher, and I think you remember I think I've interviewed him a couple times, but he was a father-daughter pair that are both involved in designing theme parks. So think like Disney theme parks. And he did such a good job, particularly at the time, because this is 2019, I think, how AI is helping them model some things as well. It might have been a little bit later than that, but that was great. One of my standouts from the early conference, Marissa Mayer, was a speaker. She was, what was she like? Employee number 32 at Google, first female product manager. I think first female engineer, became a product manager and went on to be the CEO at Yahoo. But she talked about what is it like to be a product manager at Google and how they came up with AdSense, the thing that generated revenue at a time when Google had no revenue, and being part of the team. That was just great. The last one I'll highlight is the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. So every year, PDMA gives out a award to 2 organizations, the Outstanding Corporate Innovator Award, and an airport won. And I thought, why does an airport need an innovation capability? But this is a really big airport, like 2,000 airport employees. They're the 3rd busiest in the world, I think she said. And they just talk about how they approach innovation. And part of that was as part of the onboarding process as a airport employee. They don't spend a lot of time as part of onboarding. It's like maybe 20 minutes or so, but they do innovation training, just really simple things like, hey, we want you to be asking questions. If you see something that you think can be improved, we want you to be asking about it, right? If you observe something that we're not doing well that could be better, how can we make the customer experience better? We want you to share that. Talk to others about that. Talk with your manager about that. And then during the first, I think it was like 6 months, they do provide more in the way of innovation training and how to get your frontline employees involved in trying to make the product, which is the airport, right, a better experience for customers. So this was just fun getting to talk about some of the past standouts at the PDMA conference. As far as quote goes, so this was one I picked, and we had, again, we have 2 quotes in all these, only because we had 2 guests on this one. So the first one, someone is going to make your product obsolete. Make sure it's you, Edward Land. And the notion there is customer preferences changes. The new technology comes out, the shiny object that your product might have been at one time is going to look pretty dull and dingy at some point. And if you're not the one looking at the next best thing and really being close to the customer to understand how their needs are changing and evolving, you're going to get passed by to someone who's paying attention to that. So we always need to be close to the customer and understanding how the problem's evolving for them.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the DFW episode too, because I've been to that
hmm
airport, and it's surprising that an airport was able to win this OCI award. I don't really think of that as being an area to innovate, but they were able to do that by making sure that every single employee, from the people doing maintenance or moving the carts around in the airport, were thinking of ways that they could help the customer experience improve.
Yeah, it was a good episode. I almost pulled it for my one from the last 10 years, but there was another one I wanted to hit. Okay, what's your next episode?
Okay, I have 548, Building a Culture of Fearless Product Innovation at Snap-on Tools with Ben Brenton.
It was on my list too. So I have it
Wow.
pulled up already. And do you remember Ben when he did the summit with us in 2020?
Yeah, I do. He's been on the podcast several times.
Yeah, he did an early episode in 2017 as the global director of innovation there at Snap-on, and then a private only sort of thing, a summit that we did. And then recently, this episode 548. And Ben was brought in to create a culture of fearless innovation. That was the mantra that the CEO gave him, his responsibility and what he had worked on. And what stood out to me so much the first time I talked to him was, well, how do you actually do that, right? There's lots to go through, and he talks about some details in this episode for sure. And it's certainly very worthwhile to listen to if you're curious about, well, how do you actually lead innovation? How do you build that culture? Episode 548. But one of the things he said back in 2017 was, well, this is how we do it. I'm out of the office 4 days a week with customers in their facilities, right? So Snap-on, they certainly build a lot of tools for car mechanics. So they're in mechanic shops. They build specialized tools for like the wind turbines that generate electricity. They build a lot of things for the aircraft industry. So he's out 4 days a week visiting customers to just observe how they do work and talk to them about problems they're running into and things they could do better for them. And he doesn't just go by himself, he's bringing with him people from Snap-on Tools, right? And that's a pretty wide range of people getting involved in understanding what their customers need. So he's certainly bringing product people with him, product managers, engineers at time, designers, but he may bring others as well from like marketing or the sales organization. And like, they're just really involved with the customer. And then when I interviewed him 2025 for this, I asked him to follow up on that. I said, are you still doing that? Because we talked during COVID times and he said, well, I'm still doing that a lot, but it's remote right now. So I don't know now. And his response was in 2025 to my question, are you still doing that? I said, well, actually now I'm in the office about 2 days a month and the rest of the time I'm out with customers. Like, wow, you must have a lot of frequent flyer miles racked up here. So he probably never has to pay for a plane flight again at this point. But he went through really good information about being customer focused and using prototyping and validating solutions and helping to get everyone on board about why innovation is important. And at first making small wins, trying to move the organizational culture over time. So super useful. I just love
Okay.
what he has done at Snap-on. And wow, we have another double quote. So pick one of those that you want to talk about.
Okay, yeah, I'll read the quote from Ben Brenton. And one thing that I remembered, I'm not sure if Ben mentioned this or if we were just talking about this afterward, but apparently Snap-on has super fan customers, and some of their customers have even gotten a Snap-on tattoo.
Right.
And so apparently this focus and dedication to understanding the customer's problems has really translated into making very valuable products and really committed customers. So the quote from Ben is, "The biggest mistakes in innovation are the products you don't launch, not the ones you launch and fail."
The biggest mistakes in innovation are the products you don't launch, not the ones you launch and fail. So I'll put my take on it. I don't remember what Ben said about this, but the ones you launch and fail are not mistakes. They're certainly learning opportunities, right? None of us wants to feel good about failing, but if we're product managers, product innovators, we certainly know the first part of our work. Until we really get to product market fit, there's going to be a lot of learning that takes place, a lot of mistakes along the way. This is the nature that we're doing something new, and simply because we're doing something new, we don't have it all figured out, right? If this was easy, the solution would be self-evident and we'd always get it right. That's not the case. So we need to learn a lot along the way. So we make mistakes along the way. We talk about embracing the failure attitude for this. Facebook's early mantra of we're going to move fast and break things kind of captures that notion, or Google's fail fast sort of idea. And so here, the emphasis, I think, is on not considering the failures that we make, the mistakes we make along the way. What is important is the learning that takes place when those things happen. Right? And we don't ultimately know how things are going to work out until we get something into the marketplace. And depending on the product, there's another quote from founder Reid about if you're not software products, right? He was doing, if you're not embarrassed by the first version you release too late, the notion that you have to get feedback from customers. I think Ben would have a different perspective because if he's putting in a tool into a professional's hands, they have high confidence about where that thing's actually going to fail, right? They know when that thing breaks. But we got to get out there and get feedback from customers and learn along the way until we actually solve the customer's need.
Yes, it reminded me of Thomas Edison's quote too, that he didn't fail 3,000 times. He just found 3,000 ways to not make a light bulb. And so sometimes failing is part of learning.
Yep, absolutely. Good quote. Okay, I'll share one next. We did 2 or 3 episodes, I think 3, with Doug Hall, the founder of Eureka Ranch. And the most recent one last year, Stop the Stupid, using proactive problem solving. And Eureka Ranch was founded maybe 33 years ago now, I think. He's a P&G guy and was known, he had a really powerful group at P&G, and at one point was known for, like, on the average American used 16 of his group's products in the morning getting ready to go to work, right? And I don't know what they all involved, toilet paper and toothpaste and who knows what else. And he started Eureka Ranch as a way to help any company pursue ideas, generate ideas for a product, get to know customers better, and actually develop products. And it sounds like just a fascinating playground to be in, and would love to know more details of that. Actually interviewing the CEO of Eureka Ranch in a few weeks to find out some more of those details. But, Doug's been doing this for a long time, creating products for himself, products for companies. And Stop the Stupid is the phrase of, like, how many times do you see something going on in your organization that is just stupid, that is a bad process, it's not creating the outcome we want, we're not doing the right thing for the customer, and how do we just do better at that, and a way of getting there. And he talks through some tools in this episode 522 for being a more proactive problem solver and trying to deal with problems more effectively and getting people actually experiencing the problem more involved, defining the problem correctly, creating an effective solution, driving out risks along the way, and gave some tools. The yellow card is a tool for kind of formalizing a framework for that. And he also talked about stimulus for innovation, right? For ideation, for where ideas come from. In the show notes, we have 6 sources of innovation stimulus and what they do to kind of get ready for a innovation engagement with a customer to help stimulate ideas and get us thinking differently and thinking more in alignment with the customer's problem that their client is trying to solve. So really fascinating group, Eureka Ranch, and it was really delightful talking with him. What quote did he share?
This quote is 94% of the problem is the system, 6% is the worker.
It's a good
Similar
quote.
to the other Edward Deming quote we discussed earlier.
Yeah. And if I'm recalling this right, I think Doug's dad worked with Deming and had a big influence on him. And Doug is also very much involved in the quality movement and things. So 94% of the problem is the system, 6% is the worker. It is that notion that if you're not getting the results you want, look at the system. And it's usually almost never a people problem, right? Certainly there are people problems, but we got to figure out if we have the right system in place to start with. And so analyze the system if you're not getting the results you want and fix that. Good quote. Any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's more details about the lessons that Doug learned from Eureka Ranch and from his other experience in his book, Proactive Problem Solving.
Yeah, it's a good recommendation to check that out. Okay, I think we've exhausted our 2025 highlights and the quotes that
Yeah.
you wanted my reactions on. Let's do the one from the previous 10 years, the one you picked, probably because you liked the quote from one of the previous 10 years.
Okay, so I picked episode 77. So this was from the second year of the podcast, Scaling Lean Product Management with Ash Maurya. And
Okay.
Ash Maurya has been on the podcast several times, and I think this was perhaps one of your favorite episodes.
Okay, so a quick highlight just the episode. Ash wrote a book about the lean startup movement, and which was running lean, and he has the leanstack.com group. So this was I think the second book in the lean series. It was running lean, and then he did scaling lean after that. So the first one was Eric Ries's book, obviously, the lean startup. But a key thing that came out of this is the need to understand what we're building for a customer to actually solve a problem for them. And that we shouldn't just create products that we think sound interesting. We should have validated learning that we're building the right thing. So very much in line with Lean Startup, just making it a little more approachable and putting it into action, where Lean Startup, Eric Ries's book, introduces a lot of really important concepts, and then Ash added on to that with practices that you can put into action. And that's what his leanstack.com capability is about, too, providing some tools to help teams with that. The quote, oh, such a good one. Okay, go ahead.
So the quote, which I know is one of your favorites, is "Love the problem, not the solution." And this is from Ash Maurya.
So it's a great quote. There's been some version of this, right? This isn't unique to Ash. I use a version of this all the time as well, teaching to my graduate innovation students at universities. The challenge that we have, my background is engineering. Engineering, we like to create, we like to solve problems and build something. And we use language like, this is my baby, right? This thing that we built that didn't exist in the world before now is possible because we made it, right? And we get attached to that solution. When you use language like, this is my baby, that kind of conveys that. And anyone that's an engineer is pretty familiar with that. If we get too attached to our solution, we don't want anyone calling it ugly. That's a terrible thing. We don't want to make changes to it outside what we envisioned as the design because we made it, right? It has a lot of us in it. Instead, we really need to fall in love with the customer's problem because that's who we're trying to solve a problem for. That's who we're trying to create value for. And if we keep our attention there, it doesn't matter if we go through 10, 20 prototypes, which ideally is what we're doing, prototypes, quick, fast, the frugal, fast things to do, not a full solution. We quickly go through validating possible solutions until we know that we're on the right path. And then we put more energy into refining that for the customer. But it's really easy to get wrapped up in the solution. And as soon as we start focusing there, we really bias ourselves away from more deeply understanding the customer's problem. And I'm cautious about that. We need to fall in love with the customer's problem, deeply understand it, understand who the customer is, and then we can start working through solution alternatives until we get it refined properly and then spend our energy developing the right thing for the customer. No one wants to spend time developing something that no one cares about. And at the same time, we don't want to get too attached because then we stop caring about the customer's problem. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, this has definitely been a theme from the episodes we've talked about today. And also, I think if there's one thing that I've learned about product management from listening to many of the episodes is will be summed up in this quote. Like we shouldn't go in whether in product management or for solving all sorts of other problems, we shouldn't go in just thinking we know the solution without taking the time to first really understand the problem and in this case actually talk to customers and understand their needs. It also reminds me of another quote which I almost picked here from Albert Einstein, who said that if I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend the first 55 minutes understanding the problem and the last 5 minutes solving the problem. And so that's very important with approaching any kind of problems in product management, or for me in physics research, or just in life in general. It's important to understand the problem first before just assuming that you know how to solve it.
Yeah. And I think as humans, we're just hardwired to hear a problem, want to start working on solution. And we really need to back up because frankly, the thing we hear first as the problem is likely a symptom and it's not the root issue, right? It's an expression of what might be needed, but it's not an understanding of what is really needed and how to improve things. So it's a great quote. I appreciate Ash sharing that with us. Okay, so my flashback episode, and of course, after 10 years of episodes, we've done 11 now, but we were looking at the previous 10. So many I could have chosen. I didn't even look at the quotes, frankly. I was thinking about episodes that kind of stand out and some that I use a lot in teaching. This is one I use a lot with my executive MBA students at the University of Fredericton in Canada, because Ken Gray, who at the time, this is back in 2015, he was one of the early guests. He was the global director of innovation for Caterpillar, and he shared how they approach innovation and talk through different practices. And it was just fascinating to me. And part of this fascination was, as I set this up with Ken, this was the first year of the podcast. It wasn't super well known yet. I had not reached that top 1% status for a business podcast. And I was very thankful to get Ken as a guest. But I worked a lot with his executive assistant. And I got to know through her and some other people just how much people thought of Ken. It was certainly his interpersonal skills that made it possible what he did at Caterpillar, right? A 33-year-long career there, and how he put so much weight on the relationship with other people and inside the organization to be able to influence the organization through innovation. Very well thought of person. But one thing that stood out was how they think about structuring their work as innovators inside the organization. And at the time, so this was 2015, I forget when the original McKinsey article came out on the 3 Horizons framework. But that framework was, there's basically 3 time horizons. When it comes to organizations, you need to be thinking about the next 1 to 2 years. Work that you're doing should be related to the core capabilities, the core products that we have, the services that we provide. We're probably incrementally making that stuff better, right? We're fixing things that are broken, doing the support work and making things incrementally better. And then the Horizon 2 is maybe that 3 to 5 year time frame where we're looking at, well, how can we leverage core into something new? Maybe it's a new market we want to develop. Maybe it's a new capability that we have some expertise, but we're going to have to develop some new expertise. So it's a little further out, takes a little longer to get there, but if we don't start thinking about it, we won't get there. And then the third horizon was like the 5 to 10 year further out range, where we're thinking about things that might seem a little bit wild for the organization now, but depending where things go, they could make sense. And some of the organizations that I've talked to, the director of innovation for Lowe's hardware store was on, don't recall the number, but applying this 3 Horizons framework, what they would do and what I've heard other organizations do, they hired, in their case, science fiction writers to portray what do we think communities, neighborhoods, cities are going to look like in 10 years. And let's start envisioning what building materials might need to be for that range, right? And trying to build different scenarios for the future, right, to get our hands around this third horizon. And then there was another article that came out, I'm pretty sure from Harvard Business Review, that talked about why the 3 Horizon model is dead. And Ken kind of, in a way, describes the new model, which is used pretty widely now, early on, what they were doing at Caterpillar. And it's described as in his terms, and other organizations use the same language now, the core work, right? What we're doing today but could do better, right? We're doubling down on the core work. The adjacent work that needs to be done as well, which is, maybe we want to move into an adjacent market that makes sense for us, or maybe there's an adjacent use of a capability that we have now that we need to explore. And then that transformational work, something that really would be completely new for Caterpillar, that people would go, wow, I can connect some dots and see how you got there, but never envisioned it. And you're doing something really wonderful now for customers and kind of outside the scope of what we would have thought Caterpillar might be doing. Kind of like Google X's projects that they've done, their moonshot type projects. And one thing that was really funny to me was he described this, and I said, Caterpillar goes by CAT. Everyone just calls it CAT. And as you were developing your framework, did you plan on the acronym being CAT, Core Adjacent Transformation? And he laughed and said, no, I actually didn't plan on it, but it worked out that way. And maybe there's just something in the DNA of a CAT employee that thinks in those terms. But this is now a very common framework and a very powerful one. And it's just a remapping of the three horizons. It's just saying the time factor is less important. It's more important that we are putting energies today into those three buckets of work, right? Our core, and as Ken would say, and most organizations did, that maybe 70% of your innovation efforts are improving the core. 20% is looking for those new opportunities related to what we're doing, maybe that adjacent market, maybe 10% into transformation. So it's a great framework. Again, one I share with my executive MBA students a lot. And the quotes, and I'm also getting a kick out of how our show notes have transformed. I know we've had a few iterations of format. The first year that this was the early format, you were not involved at the time because it was so long ago. But nonetheless, so our quote, you want to read the quote for this one?
Yeah, sure. Anything that won't sell, I don't want to invent. Its sale is proof of utility, and utility is success. Thomas Edison.
This is a good one that's kind of in line with some of our others, right? About building a product people actually want, as opposed to something that you might think is clever or novel, but doesn't actually help the customer accomplish what they want, right? Doesn't get that job to be done accomplished, doesn't meet those needs. So anything that won't sell, I don't want to invent. Thomas Edison, as a kid growing up, became an engineer later. I liked reading about some of the early inventors, and Edison was on that list, and so was Tesla and some others. And at least from what I read, Edison's strength was really marketing, right? He knew how to build a good lab, right? He had 250 people working on the light bulb, apparently, until they figured that out. But he was really good at the marketing aspect of this and thinking about, well, what actually solves customers' problems? What do customers actually want? So this is that pragmatic business perspective that we need to solve customers' problems. And if we aren't, they're not going to want to do business with us. So I think that just makes this pragmatic position for innovation. Solve a real problem, do it in a way that customers agree that you've done it well, and then customers will be happy.
Yeah, Edison said utility. You could probably also say value. I think something you talk about a lot is creating
Mm-hmm.
something that's actually creates value for the customer and for the business.
Yeah, really good. So that was a lot of fun to give some reflections on the quotes kind of in real time with you. And I think back on some of the episodes that stand out. Really enjoyed that. Anything else that you wanted to accomplish?
Would you like to share your favorite innovation quote?
My go-to, there's lots of ones I really enjoy. My go-to is a Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And you and I have talked about the mathematical problems with this, which you're welcome to bring up. But the notion here for me is for innovation, as I kind of shared before, there's going to be mistakes. We're going to have to learn. And no one likes the feeling of failure, right? And if you're in operations, you don't fail, right? You're always trying to make things better. It's that kind of the total quality movement sort of approach. We're making things more reliable, more consistent, more repeatable. In innovation, that's not at all the case. It's very different. We're just trying to figure out what works, right? How do we understand the problem, right, and satisfy the customer? And we're going to fall down a lot. We're going to make mistakes and fail a lot. What matters is getting back up and moving forward. So I think that this applies equally well to an entrepreneur, anyone trying to do something new, anyone that has a vision, trying to make a change in some place. We have to keep getting up, learn from what we have done before, reframe those falling down into learning experiences, and keep getting up and making things better.
Yeah, I like this quote too. Apparently, it assumes that you started off down, so you have to get up one time. and then you can get up a total of 8 times. But yeah, that ties back to some of the previous quotes we talked about failure and that making mistakes is part of innovation.
Yeah, it is my go-to when I'm asked for an innovation quote. I encountered it a long time ago and really like the notion of keep making progress, keep learning, and keep trying things. Okay, this has been a lot of fun to highlight some of the innovation episodes that we've had and also the quotes to think about that. This will be episode 573. So if you want to find the show notes for this version, simply go to productmasterynow.com/573. Caitlin, thanks for suggesting the idea and thanks for doing the episode with me.
Thank you.
And listeners, as always, keep innovating and Happy New Year.
Thank you for listening to Product Mastery Now, where product leaders and managers gain product mastery through practical knowledge, influence, and confidence. By listening, you are becoming a product master, creating products customers love. Find additional resources at productmasterynow.com. Keep innovating.